I was watching the 76ers play the Warriors, and honestly, I wasn't seeing anything special from Buddy Hield. He's definitely cooled off since his hot start to the season, with just 3 points in that game and only 2 points in the outing against the Cavs. And at this point, that's just what we've come to expect from Buddy Hield. He'll start the season strong, but as it goes on, he tends to come back down to earth. I don't think he'll just start averaging just 2 or 3 points per game. It's just been a rough stretch for him. He kind of reminds me of Vinnie Johnson from the Detroit Pistons, aka the microwave, for how hot he can get, but then some games he's just average. Maybe we should start calling Buddy Hield the microwave because of how quickly he can heat up and then cool down. But I stand by what I said earlier, that he was a solid replacement for Klay Thompson. The Warriors didn't have much to work with, but at least they got someone who can fill a similar role. Not at the level of prime Klay, of course, but a good option at a reasonable price for what he's worth. Now, Klay Thompson on the Mavericks, I've been pretty hard on him in a video I made calling his season inconsistent. One thing Klay has been consistent with, though, is his downward trajectory. 3 years ago, he was averaging 22 points per game, then it dropped to 18, and now this season he's at 14. Clearly, he's trending down, and I'm not sure if his production is worth the locker room turmoil he would have caused. And I'm not saying this out of any dislike for Klay. As a fan, I wanted to see Curry and Klay have their jerseys raised in the rafters as all-time Warrior greats, but now that can't happen. This offseason was pretty underwhelming. Losing a guy like Klay Thompson means you need to replace him, and while Buddy Hield was a decent start, you don't just want to swap out Klay, especially a washed version of him as we saw last season, for a simple replacement. You want to make an upgrade. The Warriors tried to do that by going after Lauri Markkanen, which I thought would have been a great addition to the team. I mentioned in my last Warriors video how Steve Kerr loves to keep things consistent, which usually means having a non-traditional big who can stretch the floor. Markkanen would have fit into the system perfectly, but the Jazz were asking for a huge price, every available pick, and every pick swap. They were really trying to make sure they didn't get shortchanged in the deal. Ultimately, the trade talks fell through because the Warriors weren't willing to include Moses Moody or Brandon Podziemski in the package. We'll get into Podziemski later, but this whole situation feels like the Warriors have 1 foot in and 1 foot out of competing. One part of them is saying, we have to give Curry another ring, now's the time to go for it. The other part is saying, we don't want to give up our younger assets, we still want to develop these guys, and will likely be respectable in the West even without making major moves. And the Warriors aren't good enough to play both sides and be complacent. So, as promised, let's talk about Podziemski. The Warriors took a bit of a risk when, after a solid rookie season, they made him untouchable in all trade talks over the summer. To be fair, he showed a lot of promise during his first year. It wasn't always smooth, especially the first month or so, but he was a quick learner. Defensively, he wasn't much to write home about at first, other than being a rebounding machine and taking charges. But by March, he was moving his feet well, staying in front of his man, and playing solid off-ball defense. I get why the Warriors were so high on him. He fits into their system, and I feel like I'm repeating myself, but Steve Kerr really values players who mesh with his style. That's why it sometimes feels like when Kuminga makes a mistake, he gets pulled, but if Podziemski does, he gets a longer leash. However, this season has been a struggle for him. Initially, Kerr tried to brush it off, saying it was just a normal sophomore slump and that there's still a long season ahead. But he still hasn't bounced back. His numbers are down from his rookie year, where he finished 5th in Rookie of the Year voting. He averaged 9 points per game last season, and now it's down to 8. His rebounds have dropped from 6 to 4.5, which is disappointing because his rebounding was one of the best aspects of his game. His efficiency has also taken a hit, with his three-point shooting dropping from 38.5% last season to 29.5% this season. His overall field goal percentage has decreased by 5%, from 45% to 40%, despite taking less attempts per game. It seems like down the line, the Warriors could have chosen to part ways with either Moses Moody, Pods, or Kuminga to give Curry a true second option. I understand why they held on to Pods though, especially considering his low contract numbers for the next few seasons, whereas Kuminga will need a new deal soon. Now the big question for them is, what happens if Kuminga demands a max? Are the Warriors prepared to pay him that? And if they do they really believe in him long term? I sometimes feel like Kuminga is an outlier in the system and his development is a bit limited by the Warriors' current situation. Take this season as an example. Without Curry on the floor, Kuminga has averaged 22 points and 5 rebounds per game. But with Curry, those numbers dropped to 15 points and just under 5 boards. While the sample sizes differ, it highlights the issue. Curry desperately needs a reliable second option, but Kuminga seems to be trying to find his own rhythm and looks like he could offer something more if given a chance. Now, when it comes to the biggest what-ifs in the NBA, the Warriors have one of the biggest. What if the Warriors chose to draft Lamelo Ball instead of James Wiseman? Right now, the Warriors could have had Lamelo, and it's clear that Wiseman will never reach half of what Lamelo has already accomplished. Lamelo was averaging over 30 points per game this season, and if the Warriors had drafted him, it would have taken some pressure off of Steph Curry. Right now, Curry is carrying way too much of the load. This was a year that people thought that the Warriors had finally figured out how to produce without Steph on the court every single second. When Curry was injured, the Warriors were still near the top of the West, and Buddy Hield was playing like prime Klay. But eventually, reality set in, and it became clear that the Warriors still rely on Curry too much. Last season told a similar story. Curry carried them earlier, but by the end of the season, he was burnt out, and their play-in game didn't go as anyone had hoped. With Lamelo, though, you're getting a player who's not afraid to step up and score when it matters most. Plus, the Warriors wouldn't have to worry about the future. They could have traded guys like Podziemski and Kuminga for bigger names like Paul George or Lauri Markkanen because they wouldn't feel the need to hold on to these players as their future core. In that scenario, the Warriors could have had a lineup of Curry at the 1, Lamelo at the 2, Lauri Markkanen at the 3, Draymond Green at the 4, and a solid center. They'd be in a much better position if that was their lineup. But what do you think? How different would the Warriors look if they had drafted Lamelo Ball? Tell me in the comment section below. Until next time, peace.